You're trespassing on private property." That was the first thing I heard when I stepped out of my truck, still wearing my fishing vest and carrying a cooler full of freshly caught trout. My plan had been simple. I was supposed to be gone for 3 days at the lake, but since I'd already caught more than enough fish, I decided to head back home early to my cabin. I was excited, thinking I'd surprise my wife with a fresh grilled dinner by the water and enjoy a peaceful evening on the porch together. Instead, what I walked into was nothing short of a circus led by the self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood, HOA Karen. There she stood, right in the middle of my driveway, arms crossed like a sheriff in some old Western movie. Her blonde hair was pulled tight into a bun, her oversized sunglasses perched on her head, and her lips curled into a smug little smile that screamed one thing: trouble. She didn't even wait for me to shut my truck door before she started shouting accusations. "Excuse me?" I asked, raising my eyebrow in disbelief. "This is my property. My cabin. What are you talking about?" I started toward the porch, confused as to why she was even here. She shouldn't have been anywhere near my property, let alone blocking my driveway like she owned the place. Karen's smile widened, and she tilted her head the way only someone with too much arrogance could. "Not anymore," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "While you were away, the HOA board voted. We decided your cabin is in violation of community rules. You should have gotten the notice, but since you didn't, I'll be generous enough to explain it to you. This property now belongs to the association." I almost laughed right then and there. Did she seriously think that just because she and her group of clipboard warriors held a little vote, they could steal a property I legally owned? "That's not how any of this works," I replied firmly, still walking toward the porch steps. "You can't just take someone's house away because you don't like how they live. That's not law. That's fantasy." But Karen wasn't alone. As if on cue, 2 of her loyal HOA board members stepped out from behind her like backup actors waiting for their scene. One of them was holding a clipboard so tightly you'd think it was a golden tablet. "We've documented everything," he said smugly, tapping the papers clipped to it. "Unapproved renovations, excessive use of the driveway, noise violations after hours. There's more than enough here to seize your property under HOA regulations." His tone was filled with satisfaction, as though he believed he had cornered me in some kind of courtroom drama. I stopped mid-step and looked at them with a mix of amusement and irritation. "You actually think your little notebook is more powerful than state property laws?" I asked. "You've got to be kidding me. I built this porch with my own 2 hands, I paid for this land in full, and there isn't a single judge in the country who would even glance at your so-called violations. You're wasting your time." Karen's face twisted into a scowl. "Watch your tone," she snapped. "You think you're above the rules? Everyone in this community abides by the HOA. Everyone. That means you too. We warned you about that ugly boat you left tied up at the dock. We warned you about leaving your porch light on after 10. We warned you about letting your dog bark in the morning. You ignored every notice. Now, you're paying the price. This is our property now." At that, I set down my cooler on the porch step and turned fully to face her. "Karen, let me make this clear," I said, keeping my voice calm but sharp enough to cut through her theatrics. "This isn't your property. It isn't the HOA's property. It's mine. You can wave your rules around all you want, but the only thing you're proving is that you've got way too much free time on your hands." For a brief second, I saw doubt flicker across her face, but she recovered quickly and leaned into her favorite weapon, escalation. With a dramatic sigh, she whipped out her phone, held it up high like a sword, and declared, "Fine. If you won't leave peacefully, I'll let the law take care of you." She began dialing 911 with the enthusiasm of someone convinced she had just won. "Yes, officer," she said sweetly when the call connected. "I need help right away. There's a dangerous trespasser at 142 Lakeview Road. He's refusing to leave, and I fear for my safety. Please hurry. The gall of it almost made me laugh. A dangerous trespasser? On my own property? She had no shame. I leaned against the porch railing, arms crossed, waiting for her performance to finish. I'd seen this tactic before. Karen always believed that if she shouted loud enough and played the victim, people would rally behind her. But this time, she had no idea who she was dealing with. She ended the call and smirked at me, her confidence renewed now that she thought backup was on the way. You're done, she said coldly. Once the police arrive, they'll drag you out of here in handcuffs. You'll never set foot on this property again. Her two board members nodded along, one of them muttering, "You should have followed the rules." I didn't even bother responding. Instead, I pulled a chair from the porch and sat down, stretching my legs out like I was settling in for a show. Fine, I said calmly. Let's wait for them together. I'll be right here when they arrive. Karen clearly didn't like how unfazed I was. She stomped her foot like a child denied candy, her face turning red. You think this is funny? You won't be laughing when you're behind bars. I just smiled, looking out toward the lake as a breeze rustled through the trees. In fact, I wasn't worried at all. I already knew how this was going to play out. Because the one thing Karen didn't know, the one thing that would flip her entire scheme upside down, was who exactly was going to step out of that police car when the sirens came blaring down the road. The sound of sirens echoed faintly in the distance, cutting through the stillness of the lake. Karen's smug expression lit up like a Christmas tree as she turned to me with that superior grin. Hear that? She taunted, her arms crossed tight across her chest. That's the sound of justice coming to take you away. You thought you were untouchable, but the law is on our side. She tapped her clipboard with a sharp snap, as though it was some kind of divine scripture, and her board members nodded with forced confidence. I didn't move. I didn't even flinch. I leaned back in my chair on the porch, calm as the lake breeze, and watched the flashing lights grow closer and closer down the road. The patrol car rolled into the driveway, red and blue lights bouncing off the trees. Karen straightened up, fixing her hair and standing tall like she was about to be awarded Citizen of the Year. The car door opened, and out stepped a tall, broad-shouldered man with a uniform that carried weight and authority, the county's chief of police, Daniels. He had a presence that demanded silence. Even the birds seemed to pause. Karen's smirk widened, and she rushed over like a child running to greet Santa Claus. "Chief," she cried dramatically, pointing at me as if she'd uncovered the crime of the century. "Thank goodness you're here. That man is trespassing on my property. He broke in, refuses to leave, and he's threatening our safety. I demand you arrest him immediately." Her voice cracked with fake fear, her hand clutching her chest like a soap opera actress. Chief Daniels, however, didn't even look at her right away. His eyes scanned the cabin, then landed on me sitting casually in my chair. For a moment, his stern face stayed unreadable. Then, out of nowhere, a grin spread across his face as he walked straight past Karen. "Well, I'll be damned," he boomed, his voice warm and familiar. "If it isn't my brother-in-law. Back early from your trip, huh?" Karen's jaw nearly unhinged from her face. What? She stammered, spinning between us like her brain couldn't process what she'd just heard. I stood and shook Daniels's hand with a chuckle. "Good to see you, Daniels. Didn't expect you'd be the one answering this circus call." Daniels clapped me on the shoulder. "Always a good day when I get to run into family. Did you get a good haul at the lake?" "Oh, plenty," I said, glancing at the cooler by the steps. "Enough trout to keep us fed for a week. I was hoping to surprise the family, but it looks like I walked into something else entirely." Karen's face had gone beet red. Her eyes darted between us, her confidence unraveling faster than a cheap sweater. Wait, she sputtered, throwing her hands up. "Brother-in-law? He's your brother-in-law? That can't be. This man is a criminal trespasser. He doesn't belong here. Daniels turned to her, his grin fading into the kind of stern expression that made even grown men sit up straighter. Karen, I know for a fact this is his property. I've been to this cabin more times than I can count. I've eaten barbecue on that porch. I've watched fireworks from that dock. This place belongs to him and his family, fair and square. You just called in a false report to 911. Do you realize how serious that is? Karen froze like a deer in headlights. Her board members, sensing the storm brewing, began shuffling backward toward the road, muttering excuses about needing to check on their cars. They clearly didn't want to be anywhere near the fallout that was coming. No, 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 Karen stammered, her voice shaking as she tried to regain ground. You don't understand. The HOA rules, our bylaws, they clearly state that repeated violations result in property seizure. We documented everything. He has ignored every notice. He's been breaking rules since the day he moved in. Danielle's eyebrows shot up in disbelief. Karen, you've got to be kidding me. HOA bylaws are not law. They don't override state or federal property rights. You can't just vote to steal someone's cabin. That's not how this works, and you know it. Karen's lips trembled, but she tried one last desperate attempt. But he left his boat out overnight. He parks in his driveway at an angle. His porch light stays on after 10. That violates community standards. Daniels rubbed his temples and let out a long sigh. Karen, listen to yourself. Do you think I drove out here, lights and sirens blazing, because someone left their porch light on? You wasted emergency resources. You filed a false police report. And you tried to frame a law-abiding property owner, my own brother-in-law, as a criminal. Do you have any idea how bad that looks for you right now? The silence was deafening. The only sound was the rustle of the trees and the faint lap of water against the dock. Karen's bravado had completely crumbled. She looked like a balloon slowly deflating, all the smugness gone. Meanwhile, I couldn't help but let out a chuckle. I told you this wasn't going to end the way you thought, I said, leaning casually against the railing. You can't out-rulebook the law, Karen. Daniels crossed his arms, towering over her. Karen, here's the bottom line, this is not your property. It never was. If I were you, I'd start worrying less about porch lights and more about the consequences of misusing 911. You're lucky I'm not hauling you down to the station tonight. Karen's eyes widened, panic flickering in them for the first time. No, no, please. There's been a misunderstanding. I didn't mean to. But Daniels cut her off sharply. Save it. You called me out here under false pretenses. That's a crime, plain and simple. And if I hear about one more stunt like this, I won't be giving you a warning next time. You'll be the one in cuffs. Her board members had already vanished, their cars quietly pulling away down the road, abandoning her to deal with the wreckage alone. She looked around helplessly, realizing there was no one left to back her up. I folded my arms, enjoying the poetic justice. Karen, maybe next time you'll think twice before trying to steal a man's cabin out from under him. Daniels gave me a knowing smile, then turned back to her with finality. Get off his property. Now. And just like that, the woman who had stormed into my driveway full of fire and arrogance was reduced to a stumbling mess, her eyes on the ground as she muttered excuses and retreated down the path. The victory was almost too sweet. Karen stood frozen in place for a few moments, like she couldn't believe what had just happened. Her face had gone pale, her lips pressed into a tight line as Chief Daniels's words hung heavy in the air. The same woman who had marched onto my property declaring it hers now looked like a scolded child caught red-handed. She opened her mouth as if to argue but quickly shut it again when Daniels's stern eyes locked on her. The silence stretched long enough to make the sound of the wind through the pines seem deafening. "Karen," Daniel said finally, his voice low but commanding, "let me explain this in the simplest way I can. What you did tonight is a criminal offense. Filing a false 911 call wastes police resources, endangers real emergencies, and could have put innocent people in danger. If I wanted to, I could put you in handcuffs right now, drive you downtown, and book you for it. Do you understand that?" Her lips trembled as she forced out a whisper, I didn't mean for it to go this far." "Oh, but you did," I cut in, unable to hold my tongue any longer. "You marched onto my driveway, you told me my cabin magically belonged to your HOA because of some made-up rulebook, and then you called the cops hoping they'd drag me off in cuffs. Don't try to act like you didn't know exactly what you were doing." Karen spun toward me, her face burning red. "I was only doing what was best for the community," she snapped, her voice wobbling between anger and fear. "If people like you think you can just ignore the rules, then everything falls apart. Someone has to enforce order." "Order?" I laughed, shaking my head. "Order isn't stealing someone's home. Order isn't abusing 911 to get your way. That's not order, Karen. That's control. That's harassment. And you crossed the line the second you stepped on my driveway." Daniels took a step closer to her, towering like a shadow she couldn't escape. "He's right. You want to enforce rules? Fine. But the moment you used the law as your personal weapon, you crossed into dangerous territory. If this happens again, I'll make sure the DA hears about it. You won't be running HOA meetings, you'll be explaining yourself to a judge." Karen's shoulders slumped, her defiance collapsing under the weight of reality. Her eyes darted toward the road where her board members had already abandoned her, their cars long gone. For once, she had no backup, no audience to cheer on her antics. She was alone. "You've embarrassed yourself enough," Daniels continued, his tone final. "Now get off his property before I decide to take you in after all." Karen muttered something under her breath, something about this not being over, but it was barely audible. She turned on her heel, stomping down the gravel driveway with her arms swinging stiffly at her sides. Every step she took away from the cabin felt like the air was clearing, like a storm cloud finally drifting off after a long, ugly downpour. When she disappeared around the bend, Daniels let out a heavy sigh and adjusted his hat. "She's something else," he muttered. "Never met anyone so determined to be the villain in their own story." I chuckled and shook my head. "She's been trying to make my life miserable since the day I bought this place. First, it was notes on the door. Then it was fines in the mailbox. And now this. She really thought she could strong-arm me with her little HOA circus." Daniels smirked. "Well, tonight she learned that family trumps her boardroom games. And if she tries anything again, she'll be learning it in court." The tension in my chest finally loosened. I walked over to my cooler, popped it open, and pulled out a cold soda. I cracked it open and raised it toward Daniels. "You want one?" He grinned. "Don't mind if I do." I tossed him a can, and we both sat down on the porch chairs, the quiet night finally settling back into its natural rhythm. The lake shimmered in the moonlight, frogs croaked in the distance, and for the first time that evening, peace felt real again. "You know," Daniel said after a moment, sipping his drink, "she's not going to stop easily. People like Karen thrive on control. The second they lose it, they get desperate." I nodded, staring out at the water. "I know. But tonight she pushed too far. Maybe getting a warning straight from the chief of police will finally knock some sense into her. If not, well, I'm more than ready for her next move." Daniels chuckled. "That's the spirit. But between you and me, I don't think she'll be so bold after tonight. She's embarrassed herself in front of her board and wasted police time. Her power is crumbling, whether she admits it or not." We sat there in comfortable silence for a while, the kind only family can share. Finally, Daniel stood, brushing the dust off his uniform. "All right, I better get back. But listen, you call me directly if she tries anything again. Don't even bother with 911. I'll handle it personally." "Will do," I said with a grateful nod. "Thanks, Daniels. Really." He gave me one last reassuring look before heading back to his patrol car. The lights faded down the road until all that was left was the sound of crickets and the gentle lap of the lake against the shore. I leaned back in my chair, sipping the last of my soda, and let out a long sigh. The evening hadn't gone the way I planned. Instead of surprising my wife with fish and a quiet night, I had dealt with Karen's biggest stunt yet. But in the end, it had backfired spectacularly. She had tried to weaponize the law against me, only to discover that the chief of police was family. She had tried to steal my peace, and instead she handed me the most satisfying victory I could have asked for. As I closed my eyes and listened to the night settle around me, one thought kept circling in my mind: Karen wasn't done, not by a long shot. But neither was I. And the next time she came knocking, she'd think twice before trying to play her games on my property. Because she now knew one thing beyond any doubt: this cabin, this land, this home, would always be mine.